Welcome to Inside Mental Health with Debbie. I am your host, Debbie Mulder. We have a great show for you today. We have Tamari Thompson-Kraft talking with us about trauma. What is trauma? And we tend to think of trauma as the result of frightening and upsetting events, but trauma can take on many different forms. But why is there such a stigma surrounding it? I'm so delighted to have Tamari with us today to discuss this very intriguing topic. So why don't we just kind of jump in and I just want to know if you could let us know who you are and where you work.
Yeah, so I'm a registered psychotherapist and I work for Lindsay Zhang and Associates in Barrie. And I started working there earlier this year, April 2020, kind of when all the COVID chaos hit is when I made that transition. So it's been an interesting journey thus far. But yeah, what I do, I help people who are struggling with anxiety, depression, mood disorders, grief, relational issues, family issues, chronic illness, and the list goes on. So that's what I do. And prior to that, I worked in the Indigenous community for 7 years, and that's where I began my specialization in trauma.
So then I think this is a good place to ask you, what is trauma?
Yeah, so trauma to me is any event or anything that causes an individual distress or disturbing emotions. So that could be a myriad of things. It could be something that's happening to an individual or something that they've observed happening, right? And trauma usually impacts how people cope with the distress, right? And that can be weeks, that can be years. It all depends on the supports people have in their life, the resources they have, and also how their brain is wired, how they're wired to process information.
And that's interesting because what somebody may see as trauma, somebody else may not see that as trauma.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
And I know from like some experiences, being in a hurricane or being in a war zone, that's traumatic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For some people, it's even, moving across the country or for kids changing schools, like that can be.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, really how they experience it. Who experiences trauma?
Yeah, and I think you were touching on that a little bit. Anyone, we're all vulnerable to that. Nobody's immune to trauma. A lot of people think, oh, I have to have something bad happen for it to be considered trauma. And then they go to those like natural disasters or, veterans who've gone through wars, things like that. Like, oh, my trauma isn't like theirs, so it can't be true trauma, which is just not true. Everybody experiences trauma differently. Doesn't mean they're overly sensitive or weird, just that they're made differently. So bullying can be traumatic. Losing your child for half an hour in a grocery store can be traumatic. And for some people, it's terror in that half an hour. And then they kind of reconcile with that and make sense with that. And okay, the terror is over. Whereas for some, they might be still living that experience for weeks, days. They may not go to the grocery store anymore. They may not take their kids anywhere anymore. It all just depends on how that person is made up.
So really anybody can
experience trauma. Yes. Yeah.
And you being a therapist, what modalities would you use to help treat somebody who has identified part of a traumatic situation and would like treatment for it?
Yeah, and that usually depends on what that person is presenting in therapy with. The type of trauma, it could be childhood trauma, it could be a war trauma, it depends. So the main two modalities that I use would be EMDR, so eye movement desensitization reprocessing, And the other one is cognitive processing therapy. And those are the main two modalities that I'll go in between. But I do weave other types of trauma work within the work that I do. So inner child work, things like that.
And so EMDR and the cognitive processing, it would depend on the client that you see, which one
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
And is one longer than the other? Does one take more time? What do you?
Yeah, so I'll touch on cognitive processing therapy, which was developed by a lady named Candace Monson, in the States. And that one is typically 12 sessions. And that type of therapy focuses on kind of the messages and the meaning a person has internalized from a traumatic experience and challenging those. So that's more verbal processing, cognitive processing, whereas EMDR totally depends on the person and how they're wired. That can be one session, that could be 20 sessions, totally depends on how they work through the trauma.
So if we can talk about the cognitive processing modality, what does that look like? If I were to come in for a typical session, what would that look like?
Okay, so usually when people reach out to me for help with trauma, I'll meet with them first and just kind of get a general history, basic information, obviously information about the presenting symptoms. Next time around, I would collect a traumatic history in chronological order to see if there's any interconnectedness, any patterns underneath that, any themes, things that keep kind of happening. And then I would start screening. So I would screen using an assessment for PTSD. And I would also screen for dissociative disorders, okay? Because that also determines the modality that's more suitable for the client. And from there, then I talk with the client about their target trauma. What do they want to focus on, especially if they have complex trauma, several traumas? Which one is the one bringing the most disturbance in your life now? Which is the one you want to focus on? And then from there, we can select, okay, maybe cognitive processing therapy is the one. And from there, the first session starts out with exploring why they think the trauma happened to them or in front of them. Not what happened, but why. And out of there, we start to see the meaning and the messages coming out. And through, working together in session and out of session, there is a homework piece. We start to challenge those kind of stuck points, is what we call them, and beliefs that could be enabling us to be reliving trauma, actually. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which one would you particularly use with children?
Well, I'm not trained to treat children in trauma.
Okay.
I'm trained to treat adults with trauma. Got it. So children is a bit different. I probably wouldn't go there. I am trained to do play therapy with children.
Great.
Which is child-led play therapy, but I'm not trained to treat trauma. So,
okay. Yeah. So it probably would look like a different kind of modality when it came to working with
I believe so. Yeah.
But those two, mostly, those are adults that would be.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. And in your experience, people walk away from therapy when dealing with trauma. Are they going to be realistic and say, you know what, I dealt with this traumatic experience. I will probably continue to have some sort of trauma in my life, but I'll be better able to manage it. Would that?
Right. So I usually have a conversation with people about that. So before we start, the interesting thing with EMDR, it was developed for war veterans originally, and has been now generalized to, the civilian population. And it works very effectively. And people have heard about this treatment and think, okay, I'm going to be cured. It's going to be fine. It's going to be great. the focus of EMDR is not to take away memories. It's that the memories are not distressing anymore. So I'm sure you've gone to bed before feeling upset, and then in the morning you wake up and the upset is still there, but it's not as intense. And that's because during sleep, specifically REM sleep, your brain is kind of processing, making sense of your emotions and the information that happened in the day, and kind of putting it in a box, so to say. So it's kind of been worked through a little bit. So Francine Shapiro, who developed EMDR, discovered that we can actually simulate a REM-like state while conscious to work through things that have gotten stuck. So everybody's brain, we go through things in the day, your brain works through it, usually during REM as well. There's a lot of work being done, and then, it's kind of reconciled and put away. Whereas, with trauma, sometimes that process gets stuck. Our brain kind of gets stuck when a trauma happens and it can't move forward. And EMDR is a way to jumpstart the brain to start processing information around the trauma again.
Awesome. And after they've done their sessions, say in EMDR, do you offer, or would you suggest having some, some check-ins?
Absolutely. Yes. Wow. EMDR, usually a person is kind of logging their experiences outside of session 2, just because, we've jump-started the processing. So the brain will continue to process outside of session. But also there's more frequent meetings with the therapist because it's such intensive work, and just to increase and boost that support. But also once the trauma work is complete, the therapist, myself, would encourage clients to reach out. We would check in maybe after 2 weeks, then maybe a month, and just kind of keep checking in to see where that person's at.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And it's such good work, but I'm sure that it's trying work for you as well.
It can be very trying at times. So, and I know you as a therapist are aware our own work is so important, and our own self-care is so important. So yeah, especially in the trauma work, it's crucial. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I kind of would like to get into that with you. I think this might be a good place to take a break.
Okay.
So when we come back, I want to talk to you about the stigma surrounding seeking help for trauma.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Why you got into this work in the first place.
Okay. Sounds good.
Very far and few between of therapists who are like you. So I'd love to have a conversation with you. And we're going to take a break and come right back.
Okay. Sounds good.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
After a night out with your friends, not having a plan for a safe ride home can leave you in a bad spot. You could end up riding in a police car, an ambulance, or a hearse. These unplanned modes of transportation can be a costly choice and do not take you home. Your plan could include a designated driver, a taxi, or public transit. Drink responsibly, choose your ride, and have a plan for a safe ride home.
Visit arrivealive.org to find out more.
All right, welcome back to Inside Mental Health. We have Tamari here with us, who's a registered psychotherapist, and she's talking with us about trauma. So Tamari, I am wondering, why is there such a stigma surrounding getting treatment as it relates to trauma?
Yeah, and I think people, just therapy in general, people are scared to focus and look at things that hurt and are distressing and hard. And so it's easier to avoid that, focusing on that, talking about that. It's easier to avoid it because when we avoid it, then we don't have to talk about it. We don't have to look at it. It's easy to just kind of keep going. However, the issue with that is that when people avoid talking about hard things or dealing with triggers or anything like that, that is sending a message subconsciously to your body and your mind that yes, this thing is scary and terrifying and we should hide from it and we should be afraid of it. So the next time somebody experiences a trigger, and that could be people, that could be places, that could be smells, that could be music even. The next time somebody's in a place where they're being triggered, their reaction is going to be more intense. The trigger is going to have a bigger impact because of that kind of reinforced message that, yes, this is terrifying. So it's easier in the immediate to avoid, but it has detrimental impact versus doing the hard work of looking at it now so that it speeds up the healing journey.
And I guess that leads into, when should you seek therapy for trauma?
Yeah. I think if anybody's feeling any distress or disturbance over something that's happened, they should seek help for trauma. I think, it doesn't matter how long it's been since the traumatic event, it doesn't matter how old or young, if it's there, if it's happened, if it hasn't been dealt with, then seeking help is probably a good step. Sometimes people may think, oh, I'll be weak, or, they're carrying shame and guilt that may not even necessarily be theirs. It's the perpetrators in the situation, or they're blaming themselves when there's no blame to really place because it was an accident that they witnessed or were a part of. So, those things, just to clear those things out, to get some freedom from those oppressive feelings that can be oppressive, I think, trauma work, seeking help for that would be a good step. And also, trauma is unnatural. So it's natural to have a reaction to a traumatic situation. Trauma is an offense to our being. So, if you're struggling with trauma, that means you're human. It's okay to not be okay. Yeah.
And so it's never too late to...
Never too late. Yeah. As long as there's life, there's hope. Yeah.
That's right. That's awesome. That's a good thing to say.
Yeah.
For people to know. Right?
Yeah.
So this work, like I said before, it's hard.
It is. Yeah.
And I guess when you're going to school and you're thinking, you know what, I'm going to be a therapist. I want to help people. What made you decide that trauma was where you were going to help people?
Yeah. Even therapy, I went to school thinking I was going to begin pre-med, and that was not my passion. My joy was always connecting with people, sharing with people. So I pursued that passion instead, people, and got my education in therapy and counseling. And then, in my own life journey, I have experienced trauma. And, that shook me, that turned my world upside down. And I had a therapist who, the work that we did together, it changed my life. It really, really did. And I just want to be able to pay that gift forward and walk with people in their healing journey. So yeah, that's where the passion for the trauma comes in.
That is awesome. So this was while you were in school that you decided to
Yeah. So my bachelor's, my family was encouraging me to go in the medical direction. And so my master's, I was funding my master's. So I decided that, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to pursue this as a career. And so I made that happen.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And you said previously that you started off with the Indigenous community.
Yes, yes. So straight out of school, straight into, high trauma, unfortunately, situations, which is very plentiful in the Indigenous community, just given the intergenerational trauma and what they've been through. So yeah, that's where I started out, right in the midst of it all. And it was a great experience. It was fantastic. It grew me. I connected with so many people. Yeah.
Yeah. And you went right into it.
Yeah.
Into the work. That's awesome. And I know as a therapist, definitely as a trauma therapist, the self-care for yourself is important.
Yes.
What do you do for self-care?
So what I do for self-care, simple things like I will walk, I will exercise, I will get away and spend time with family. I will take breaks from doing what I do if I need to. I love to sing. I haven't sang publicly because of COVID in quite some time, but I do sing. I love to read. So, just simple things, spending time with my kids. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
Watching movies. I love action movies. So.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And are these things, probably the same things that you would recommend to your own clients as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, as a therapist, you got to practice what you preach, man. So, the things that I'm recommending to my clients, I have put in my own life as a practice. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great. So in terms of things going forward for you, is this work that you want to continue, or are you looking in a different direction?
No, I want to continue this work. I think this is important. I think this is important. This is life-changing stuff. I think all therapy is life-changing, but especially when people are just kind of having a hard time digging their way out of, the impacts of trauma. I think this is huge. And yeah, I'm here to stay in this arena.
That's so fantastic.
Yeah.
So Tamari, can you tell us, what does trauma look like?
Yeah. So, if somebody's wondering, okay, am I really experiencing trauma? That sounds very extreme to say. Well, the way you can kind of judge, am I experiencing trauma, or is there some impact from an event? If there is irritability, easily frustrated, or you feel hypervigilant, like on guard all the time, or guilt, shame, self-blame, also feeling numb, kind of like an outer body experience sometimes. That's normal trauma reactions. But then with severe trauma that people have a harder time recovering from, a lot of people will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And that includes all that I just kind of listed, but also, reliving the traumatic event as if it's happening in the current time, reacting in your physical environment physically like the event is happening again, nightmares, intrusive thoughts about the event, flashbacks, things like that. So that would be added on to the list I mentioned prior as something of what trauma could look like. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we will have nightmares, we will get frustrated, we'll be angry. How do we know that it actually is related to trauma? Is there a frequency of these symptoms that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so I think with nightmares, it's usually when it's not related to a traumatic event, it's a one-off, it's here and there. Whereas with PTSD, it's frequent, constant. People are afraid to go to sleep. There's sleeplessness, and I think that's when it should be sounding off alarm bells, like, okay, maybe I need to find someone and get some help. It's usually the nightmares are about the brain trying to process the trauma, but not working it through quite properly. And so that's why it's like a reoccurring event that it can be extremely stressful.
That's a great list.
Yeah.
And that really helps people really identify and say, okay, this is actually trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
If there is some trauma work and they've identified and they're watching today and they realize, yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
Where can they find you?
Yeah. So currently I'm working with Lindsay Zhang and Associates in Barrie. And so they can contact the office there. My email, tamari@lindsayzhang.com. And the office usually will book clients in, or people can even go on the Lindsay Zhang website and book themselves in. So
fantastic. Great. And any last words that you want to say about trauma or or encouraging people to seek treatment?
Yeah, I would say, do it. Step out and do it.
Absolutely.
You don't have to carry this. And most times it's not for those to carry that are struggling, and give yourself that gift and experience freedom and release from that, and reach out and seek some help.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tamari. I really am inspired by the work that you do, because it is tough, but it's so needed.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing what you do and for coming on today and talking about it.
My pleasure. Thank you for
Being
having
light to it. And I could imagine that there are many people watching today who realize, yeah, that's me, and I need to do something about it.
Yeah.
There's no shame in that.
No shame. Yeah.
No shame in that. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to Inside Mental Health. And I just want you to remember that you're not alone. Let's erase the stigma of mental health together.